So like you said, I'm a product manager at x.ai. So I'll give a little bit of background on what we do and kind of the design space that we're in, building these human-AI interactions, and then go through some of what we've learned over the past almost 3 years. So we schedule meetings. That's what we're focused on. That's all we talk about around the office, how we schedule meetings. And so we're building a personal assistant powered by AI that schedules meetings. And the pain of scheduling meetings is not new. Everybody in this room has to go to meetings. My meetings don't tend to be about memes, but I really wish they were. And so it's a pain that we all experience. Over 10 billion meetings per year are set up. Formal meetings, so not reminders, but you're actually meeting up with somebody. And for most of us, you take on that pain of setting up the meeting entirely yourself. You do that back and forth. You see when you're free, how does that line up? Do you have to reschedule? You take all of that on yourself, and that adds up a lot over time. And there have certainly been a bunch of different ways people have tried to address this problem, whether through apps or designing a web page or a calendar extension. You name it, someone has tried it. And so our solution is really unique in that we're building these intelligent agents. Amy and Andrew Ingram are their names. And they take over that task for you in full. So all you have to do is CC them into an email conversation, and they'll take all of those emails back and forth off of your plate. So just to illustrate kind of one example. So someone sends me an email asking to meet up, asks to meet for coffee next week. Get that email. All I have to do is respond back, say, sure, next week sounds great, let's meet up for a coffee, and CC Amy in, and she'll go to work. So she'll look up to see, did I give a time frame? Did I give a specific meeting location? And apply those constraints to the meeting. And she'll also look at, have I set any preferences? Maybe I really only like to take coffee meetings on Tuesday and Thursday in the afternoon, and that I have a favorite coffee shop downtown near my office. And so she'll apply those constraints, reach out to my guests, propose sometimes, and take over that conversation. And all I have to do as a user is just sit back and wait for that calendar invite. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of one of the first design choices that we made at x.ai, because it's one that really shaped all of the decisions we've made since then in building our product. And that decision was to humanize Amy and Andrew. So we went this route of there's this conversation that takes place over email. It's not that you go to a website. And so as we build this conversation, we really think of this as that's what our interface is. There isn't a more traditional visual interface that we're working with. So this is kind of what we think about invisible software and a conversational interface. And so you might be wondering, so what are the types of things you're concerned with then in a conversational interface? So in designing for visual interface, things like typography, color, different UI elements, motion are, really important. But in thinking about how to design a conversation, it comes down to tone, style, word choice. How do you sequence different phrases? Where do you put the emphasis on in the text? Because that's truly what we're working with. And moving further in kind of what our design space looks like, I want to talk a little bit about data science, because we are an AI company. So data science and building this product, that's really the cornerstone of what we do. And so about 2/3 of our team are data scientists or engineers. So as we look to build new features or expand Amy and Andrew's feature set, we kind of always have to come back to data science. What is possible? What is feasible? How do we go about this? And it's hard. If you imagine this conversational agent, the types of features you might think we should add is really kind of endless. It's natural to go from, well, so she sets up that meeting. Can she make that lunch reservation? Can she set up that flight for me? All of these types of things. And it's great ideas, but hard to execute on from kind of the technology perspective. So that's why we're really focused on just the task of scheduling a meeting for now, and maybe down the line we'll be able to incorporate some of those other features. And also on this note, and tying into kind of the conversation, every email we send, we're trying to drive to a specific conclusion. So our goal is to schedule that meeting. That is the task that Amy has set out to do. So every email we send needs to be pushing for some conclusion. It's not just a conversation where you're chatting with Amy or Andrew about the weather. She's there to finish her task and have this negotiation about what time is the meeting, where are we meeting, who's in the meeting, do I need to add agenda items, is there a specific title you want for it? That's what she's focused on. And so something that we've had to spend a lot of time figuring out is, so how do you measure a conversation? How do you figure out if one conversation is worse or better than another? And because the kind of realm of conversational interfaces is still pretty new, there weren't best practices that we could come back to, so we had to come up with our own. And so this next slide is a little bit crazy, so bear with me as I try to explain it. So this is called a Sankey Diagram, and it represents different conversation flows. So each of the colored vertical bars that you see represents an email in our system. So it could be an email that we've received or an email that Amy and Andrew are sending out. So we categorize each email that we have of what is the content of that email. Are we proposing a time? Are we proposing a location? Has someone come back to say that they need to reschedule a meeting? Or just what is in that email? So if you notice in the darker blue column, there are different ways that that conversation flows. And there's the lighter blue bar, which means that, and it's kind of about, I don't know, 2/3 of the overall bar, which means most people respond with that. And so you'll see that given certain types of responses, the conversations are either shorter or longer. And while this is only one representation of how you can measure a dialogue, it's certainly one that we've found to be really helpful in thinking about how do you visualize the conversation that Amy and Andrew are having. How do you think of this? It's not just, kind of wireframes or prototypes that you can look at, but this kind of comprehensive view of all of the conversations Amy and Andrew might be having. And so the next element of our design space that I want to touch on is around human ambiguity. So because we're building a conversational agent, people can really say anything they want to Amy or Andrew, and we have to figure out how do we deal with that? What does that mean? What did they say? And humans aren't always clear. So kind of one example that we always like to give is, so imagine that you have a early meeting scheduled for tomorrow and 9 a.m. and you're at this event tonight. Maybe it runs a little bit late or you go out afterwards, and when you get home about 1 a.m., you look, you see you have a 9 a.m. meeting on your calendar and you want to push it back. You don't think you're going to make it. So you email, you say, hey, that meeting we have tomorrow, can we push it back a little bit? Except that it's after midnight. So tomorrow is really today. And as humans, we all understand that because it's not really tomorrow until we've gone to bed. But how does a machine understand that? How do we think about that? So we've had to build into Amy and Andrew this understanding of how do humans talk, how do they think, what types of things are expected of them. So I think that these are just some of the really interesting elements that we're really focused on thinking about at x.ai and how we design for Amy and Andrew. And so now I want to talk a little bit about what we found that has worked well and kind of what characterizes a successful AI agent. So truly autonomous, that users can communicate in natural language, and that is a natural response to the user. So I'll start with the truly autonomous. So this is that Amy and Andrew, they take over that task in full. And this is a shift in how we think about software. Most software is designed to assist you on a task. It helps you do something a little bit faster or a little bit more accurately. Photoshop helps you, but it doesn't take over that task for you. You're still working on it. So Amy and Andrew, they actually take the entire task off of your hands and you don't have to do anything. And so that's one of the principles that has really pushed us of making sure that Amy and Andrew don't kind of come back asking you open-ended questions around, well, do you want to meet Thursday, or how about 9 a.m.? No, they're here to work that meeting for you, so they don't come back with these unnecessary questions. But Of course, there are situations where an assistant, human, AI, doesn't matter, might need to get a little bit more info to really understand what's going on. And so early on, when kind of faced with these types of decisions, we stumbled onto the power of default assumptions so that we don't have to come back asking these open-ended questions, but rather we have kind of a framework in place of, so what would the best decision be here? How can we communicate that to the user and let them know what we are doing so that they can come back and correct us if perhaps we made the wrong choice. So just to give one example of this here is, say that I ask my assistant Andrew to add a reminder to my calendar for tomorrow at 2 p.m. Because I need to make a dentist appointment. And as he goes to send out that invite, he notices I already have something on my calendar for 2 p.m. So I'm asking him to schedule something even though I already have something in that slot. What should he do? And so as we thought about this, there were kind of two potential outcomes here. He could go ahead, send out that invite, or he could come back and say, no, you already have something on your calendar, I can't do that. And so what we built instead is that, and it comes down to whether the existing event on my calendar was scheduled by me, or did Amy or Andrew schedule it. So if I had just added an event to my calendar, they'll book over it. They'll send out that invite for 2 p.m. and they'll send me a really nice email that says, great, I've added that event to your calendar, but just so you know, you have a conflict. And so then I'm armed with the information of, do I need to change my calendar? Do I need to reschedule or not? Whereas in the case where Amy or Andrew had scheduled that existing meeting, they actually will not send out that invite because they have already promised that slot to somebody else. So they don't want to, they are a good assistant who would not give the same time slot to two different people. So that's something that we, as we design new responses and encounter new situations, we try to think about that of how can we build for this so that it doesn't put more work onto a user to have to sort it out, but maybe we can go with a call that's going to be good 60% of the time and let them come back and correct us if we were to make a mistake. And so the next two around the communicating a natural language and having a natural response, they're really obviously quite tied to each other. So there's the NLP side of things, data science challenge of text, extracting information from an email. And because we decided to humanize Amy and Andrew, it was really important to us that people can talk to Amy and Andrew just as they would to a normal, anybody else. So no type of machine syntax that you have to adhere to, but just you're having a conversation with someone over email. And that's been really important both from just how people feel when they interact with our product, but also from data collection purposes. So I think it's clear that from an AI company, we're very focused on what information we're getting. But I think that one of the things that makes a really exciting product to work on is, so how do our AI agents respond back to you? What do those responses look like? How do we build those types of responses? All of that. And as we started, it wasn't something that we really knew the answer to of who do you go out to hire to do this job? The job doesn't really exist. So we created a job called an AI interaction designer, and that role is really focused on owning the voice of Amy and Andrew and shaping how those responses are, so that if you interact with Amy one day and then 3 weeks later you interact with her again, she feels like the same person because it is a personality, a persona that you're talking to. And so as we did this, we had to think about, so what does that personality look like? What are the characteristics that we would describe them as? And so we landed on polite, professional, friendly, and clear. And these are all characteristics that you would probably expect to find in a human assistant. And so for all of the emails that Amy and Andrew send out, we think that these characteristics cover kind of how they sound, how do they talk to you, what types of words do they use exclamation marks, do they use, dashes, all of those types of things. These were decisions that we had to make. And I think just to kind of end on some testament to the great success of our AI interaction design team is that, daily Amy and Andrew are kind of in this Turing test. Do people think that she's human or not? And in fact, people don't realize that they're talking to AI. And so we've had to build for situations where they mistake Amy or Andrew for a human. So in this slide, you'll see that, someone has asked Amy to give them a call, but they can't. So we had to build a new response that just kind of politely lets them down that, they can't talk on the phone, but they'll more than happy to help you set up the meeting over email. And this next slide is around how people talk to Amy, how both users and customers, they feel this need to thank Amy for this task that she has done for them. And when they do thank her, they refer to Amy and Andrew as her, not it, her, him. So people have kind of really latched on to this idea of a humanized AI assistant, and I think that in part that is due to the amount that we've invested in how Amy and Andrew talk and interact with you. And I think that, this wasn't something that we necessarily anticipated going into, but was definitely a really pleasant surprise. So yeah, that's us at x.ai and how we think about designing for conversational agents, AI agents, and I think that this is a really new area, and so it means that there's a really awesome group of people who are working on this, thinking about it, trying to figure out, so what are the best practices, what does this look like, what do we need to be thinking about, and so we're about 2.5 years, almost 3 years in, and I think we've answered some of the questions and certainly have a lot more to go. Thank you. Yeah, so it's split. We have. No, so our customers are kind of split between using Amy and Andrew. We certainly see some people who stick to using just Amy or just Andrew, but we also see people who flip between them. So kind of the go-to example is, what if you're meeting up with an Amy or an Andrew? It would be really confusing to CC an Amy, your assistant, to schedule a meeting with Amy, your guest. That'd be kind of confusing. Or, Andrew, I guess it's been a while now, but we actually have an Andrew at the office, so it was this whole big thing of, okay, so what email do we give you? We worked it out, but it was touch and go for a bit.
We had both an Amy and an Andrew in our office.
Yeah.
Hey, very interested in the role that you are hiring for with the AI interaction designer. I'm just kind of curious about the type of design deliverables that person would deliver, and then what kind of routines would happen as a result.
Yeah, so our AI interaction designer is actually here in the office, or here in the crowd. So she could maybe answer some questions later on about it. But I think that one of the things, so it is, the set of responses is one part of the role for sure, so how do we craft these responses, what types of things go into it. But it's not just that, it's also thinking about from this bigger picture of, so what types of interactions are we looking for? Do we need new variables to be able to express different, is there information we're lacking, or how do we make sure that we're injecting empathy into certain templates? So it's kind of this mixture of kind of more granular generating responses, but also thinking in a bigger picture of what do we need to really continue to deliver on this humanized AI experience. And I think that it's a role that has certainly evolved a lot as we kind of get further into it and figure out what we need and what we're looking at. But yeah, so we've had 2 AI interaction designers, and they're both awesome to work with, and really glad to have them on our team.
Hey.
Hey.
I really like the fact you're talking about how the persona being actor is
Yeah, great question. So I'll start by addressing kind of the second part of your question around have we thought about having different personalities for Amy and Andrew. So Amy and Andrew, they share a personality. So they talk the same, they act the same. And one of the motivations behind this was that we didn't want to really, contribute to gender stereotypes around assistants. So we didn't want to build a female assistant that was softer or more feminine or anything. So they talk the same, and I think for now that served us pretty well. Could you repeat the first part of your question?
Just more about like prototyping out that personality,
Yeah, for sure. So as we kind of see, as Amy and Andrew run into different types of scenarios, so at this point, we have a pretty good understanding of what types of scenarios come up, how do we respond to those. But definitely in the early stages, as we were still kind of discovering what this world of scheduling a meeting looked like, we spent a lot of time figuring out, so what should we do here? How do we think about this? And so I think that tied back into not only the personality characteristics, but where we can put these smart assumptions in place to kind of minimize choice or minimize asking open-ended questions. Because not only if you ask open-ended questions, that means that you can really get any type of response back, which is both bad for getting the meeting actually scheduled, but also really bad for data science because we want to be able to predict what someone comes back and says.
So the beta system is trying to schedule a webinar administrator. But do you have any feedback from the user from people who receive it? How they speaking to the chatbot versus the
Yeah, so I think with any product, the response can vary a little bit. We certainly have our fair share of people who don't realize that they were talking to an AI. So when they get to the meeting, people will say, oh, where's Amy, where's Andrew, I want to say hi, and then our customer has to just let them down, hey, sorry, she's not here. But with that said, I think that we do face a different set of challenges of how do people want to interact with AI, and I think it has some really interesting questions just around kind of social dynamics and behavior, because I think it's clear to imagine kind of in this current setting of who has AI assistants, it's typically reserved for people who are higher up, VP, CEO level, they have their assistant. Whereas someone like me, a couple years out of college, if I were to send you to schedule with my personal assistant, you might be wondering, why is this 25-year-old making me talk to her personal assistant? That's really weird. And so that's something that we've had to kind of figure out and some people are really kind of concerned with, is this right for me? I don't really think that this sounds good. The dynamics of, meeting with someone who's higher than you. So that's definitely something we've had to contend with. And I think that as we kind of grow, we'll see more on that. But I think the solution that has worked well for us in those cases of people who, it's really they're uncomfortable and how do I bring Amy into the conversation? How do I make sure that she's going to be polite to this really important person that I'm trying to meet. And so we try to make sure that, she's always really courteous and polite and friendly so that you can trust her, but they still kind of, it's a fair concern, I think. But I think it's going to change over time as more and more people realize that Amy and Andrew can schedule all your meetings for you.
I have a question. I was on the receiving end of having a meeting scheduled with Amy, and it worked almost flawlessly. It was very cool. I realized probably just 2 emails in that he was AI. The question that I have is, the tone was excellent for startup type of situation. Is that sort of your initial target market? And what struck me as a question, the one that I was coming from was very, very, very formal prior to that, and I don't think that the tone work in a very, very formal environment. So are you thinking about expanding design to like different personalities to fit the corporate cultures that you're addressing?
Yeah, that's definitely a really great question around, so, is there more polite versions of Amy, more formal versus, more casual? And I think it's definitely something that we talk a lot around the office of this being really important. But for now, we do just have kind of this one persona. But I think that it's a really interesting question of how do we design for this? So when would we introduce, you know, a more formal Amy? What are the triggers? Is it that you say you always want a really formal Amy or Andrew, or is it that you expect Amy or Andrew to adapt in these different situations so that if you're trying to meet up with a friend for a beer, she's more casual, but if you're trying to meet up with the VC, she's more formal. And so I think it's a really interesting question, and one I think we'll kind of get to a little bit down the line, but we're still pretty young. Thanks.